Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such an amazing place to live, work, and play. Look, we've had a string of amazing shows over the last week or so. I particularly enjoyed my conversation with Fred Hayes, the Apollo 13 astronaut. Had him for a whole hour. We actually got into some interesting new ground with him. I learned that when he was doing some reporting work for the Daily Herald, the predecessor to the Sun Herald, that they referred to him as Scoop Jr., which I found that really interesting because Jack Nelson, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the Los Angeles Times, had been in the Washington Bureau for 21 years, worked at the Sun Herald at the time, and Fred Hayes worked with Jack, so they called Jack Scoop, and they called Fred Hayes Scoop Jr. And what an interesting, when you're talking to a famous person, their story's been told every way you can do it. Even made movies about Fred Hayes. But that was an interesting kind of new information. That I really enjoyed that. One other conversation, I want to really direct you, if you haven't seen my conversation with Senator Jeremy England, go take a look at it. We talked about a seminar that he went to for emerging leaders at Charlottesville at the University of Virginia. And we talked about his visit to Monticello, and we talked about our founding fathers. I came from newspapers, so I'm incredibly interested in the history surrounding our country and the people that were behind it and how brilliant they were, and this collection of men in that moment and what came from it, the most incredible country in the world. And but he's so well read, so incredibly well read, and it was just a terrific conversation. But one of the things I read during the week last week that I think is so important is something that Plato said. It said this: the price good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. That's Plato who said that. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. But anyway. One of the things that Jerry St. Pé said early on, and has continued to say, is that the biggest issue that we will always fight against in this community is complacency. That everyone's got to be working hard to not protect the status quo, but raise the bar, and not be complacent. That it's important, as Plato said, that we not pay a price for being indifferent to public affairs and end up being ruled by evil men. In this case, maybe electing some elected officials that aren't particularly focused on doing the right thing. So, good stuff. Great shows. I really enjoyed. And now I'm going to turn over to someone I admire greatly, the president and CEO of Jackson County Chamber of Commerce, Paige Roberts. How you doing, Paige?
I'm doing great, Ricky. And I wanted to say, as I'm fond of saying now, that I taught Senator Jeremy England when he was in high school. That was the time I was developing broadcast journalism for the Mississippi State Department of Education in high schools. And so I had Jeremy in his 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th years in a variety of journalism classes. So I'm very proud of him and not surprised to hear about that program he attended or your thoughts about him, your comments. He really is developing into quite a leader.
Well, hey, Paige, was there a sign even then, this is a special kid?
Sure. Now, he will tell you I'm the only teacher who ever gave him a C, and it's because I would let them do news stories on topics they liked, and he loves fishing. So he would go out to do this story on fishing, only he went fishing and never did the story. And so essentially I had no choice but to give him a C.
But, he's extraordinarily well-read. He's a conservative. One of the things I pointed out in the show was that I don't always agree with him, but I love the fact that it doesn't matter to him if you disagree. He likes the notion of being engaged around around different solutions and different points of view. He, as I said, extraordinarily well read, and so I really enjoy spending time with him because I never know where the conversation is going to go, and I'm going to look for great things for him.
Jeremy,
as he represents,
yes,
the coast.
He's very intelligent,
Jackson.
and I saw where he went to Monticello, and I would recommend to both of you a book called Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power by John Meacham, who, like us, is a former reporter for Newsweek magazine and has written several historical biographies. But Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power is very good.
I've actually heard of it, and as I mentioned to Jeremy, and I'll say to you that I've been a student of Thomas Jefferson forever. The fact that he was such a Renaissance man, in the moment, obviously that collection of men, all of them made terrific contributions to the founding of what we now know as the United States of America. But boy, his role was incredible. And self-taught architect and all these. I mean, it's just an amazing story. Hey, listen, I am so thrilled with the news that you're going to be appointed to the Coastal Mississippi Tourism Board. That is music to my ears.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, the Board of Supervisors last week did appoint me to take the term that Jim Williams left as he retired. And now I will be serving along with Greg Cronin and Jerry St. Pé, representing Jackson County, but serving the entire coast.
Yeah. Well, so as listeners may not know, Greg Cronin was actually recently made the chairman. He was the vice chairman or vice president. I think maybe the way they say it, but he's now the chairman of the commission in an emergency meeting. But there's still this unfinished business over here to the side where Brooke Schultz was not asked to continue to be on the board. Her term was going to be up, and she had just been elected chairman again. And there's a lot of confusion now about at-large and who appoints them versus the districts of the supervisors. And Tim Holloman, the attorney for Harrison County Board of Supervisors, said that there's some gray area here, that they should seek a attorney general's opinion around that. And I think that so we'll get that, and that will run its course. And whether Brooke is put back in as chairman or not, the role that Greg will play as chairman, or maybe not as chairman, is going to be really important. And the thought that Jerry St. Pé, the significant, historic leader he's been for coastal Mississippi, I've worked with him for so many years and have tremendous respect for him, and the role that you'll play as a fundamentally important leader to not just Jackson County but the coast, and your engagement around what it takes to build a great community. You three are going to be incredibly important to it. And by the way, the confusion around the at-large versus the other appointments is I think one more clear picture that probably in the future there needs to be some tweaking of the legislation that created the Coastal Mississippi effort to begin with. When we recommended that, incidentally, when I was leading as chairman of the tourism recovery effort after Hurricane Katrina, we recommended that we go to a regional effort. When I left to go to Mobile, John Hairston, I was the chairman of the tourism committee for the Gulf Coast Business Council. And when I left, John Hairston became the chairman of that committee. They worked really hard in the trenches to make that happen. Legislation, you never hit it the first time out. You always have to come back, or usually have to come back and make adjustments and some, just some refinements and whatever. We haven't done that since we created the Coastal Mississippi tourism effort. And I think, all the noise that we've had to deal with is a real indication that we ought to take another look at it. And I'm pleased that many coast legislators have reached out to me and are thinking about it. Their role should be not to try to mute the conversation. Some legislators actually worked overtime to make the conversation go away, saying there's not an appetite for it, but there's a huge appetite for this. And I've told them that their role is not to mute the conversation, but to simultaneously, maybe in a parallel track of work, find what some potential solutions might be. If you were going to go do this legislatively, how might we do this? What are some best practices around the world? Around the United States? How did they do regional efforts like this? What can we learn from what others have done? So we know if we go in there to tweak, we're not just going in there to fix some things that are wrong with the legislation, but maybe there's some refinements we can make that make it even better. So what I love about you being involved with Greg and Jerry and a few others that are on the commission is that you're going to sort through it. We're going to sort through it, and once and for all, we're going to be able to understand, why does this noise keep happening? Why are we so internally focused instead of being externally focused on marketing coastal Mississippi? And how do we get a seat at the table for the tourism industry? Too often, people who don't have a stake in this are appointed to the board, and that's not an appropriate way to go forward. Hey, we're going to shift gears. Anything else you want to say on that before we move on?
Well, I was just going to say, as you know, Jerry St. Pé and I, like you, are both former journalists, and a journalist's mind does seek to understand, to deconstruct, reconstruct, and then communicate where it is and where it needs to be and how it needs to get there. So I agree.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Great leadership emerging in this effort, and I really do believe we'll get to the bottom of it. There's no doubt about it. Hey, when we come back, we'll find out the latest on the SOS Pascagoula effort, which is incredibly important, and we'll also discuss what's happening in the Jackson County Chamber these days. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. I have Paige Roberts, the president and CEO of the Jackson County Chamber. Hey, Paige, before we move too much faster, and we're going to talk about SOS Pascagoula next, I wanted to mention this to you. I had a lunch with Delbert Hoseman recently, and we just caught up and talked about things. We talked about the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund that I was really working so hard over a couple of years to see our state do. I think it's groundbreaking legislation that passed. And $10 million this year. They promised $20 million in subsequent years, and essentially we'll probably get up to $40 million in federal matching funds to go along with it. So it's a really important thing. But he gave a compliment to me, and it speaks to what you just said. Your journalism background. Of course, Jerry St. Pé is even in his book. Jerry St. Pé speaks so vividly about how journalism was this basis for helping him ultimately rise to become CEO of Ingalls. But the compliment was that Delbert said to me, he said, I know you know the issues really well, that when I'm dealing with you on an issue, I can bet you did your homework. And that's true. I don't try to lock on to anything at a surface level. I want to, before I'm going to speak about it, before I'm going to write about it, I'm going to develop trust with a lot of different sources and try to do my best to understand what the situation is. And I think that's, people will say of me that I don't burn people. I don't. I know how to keep confidences. I know how to develop trust with people. And it pays off, and it helps me learn not just what's on paper about something, but about what, when you get different perspectives, you can be more passionate about it because you have a sense that what you're thinking about it is pretty close. So, I'm sure people have said that of you before too, that, again, your journalism helps you really not just do your research, but organize your thoughts. I mean, that's really important, isn't it?
Oh, very much. And it is about first understanding, which is basically what you just described, and then being able to, after understanding it, be able to work with it or mold it or communicate about it so as to be a change agent if change is needed, or to defend the status quo if that is what is needed. But without the understanding through thorough, basically research that you described, you're just not doing the process correctly. So yes, I am very thankful for my journalism degree, even though I'm not a paid journalist.
Right. No doubt. Again, the ability to communicate, the ability to organize your thoughts. You never really feel like you've arrived in learning about something. There aren't two sides of the story. There is many sides to the stories. There are people involved in the story. So, that adds to the complexity, as you well know.
Sure. And when you were talking about Lieutenant Governor Hosemann, didn't I see that he named Joe Cloyd, our friend from Ocean Springs here in Jackson County, to that board? I was very pleased to see that.
Yeah, Joe's going to be on the board of trustees overseeing the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund money. And Joe's awesome. He's smart as hell. He's a businessman. He's incredibly successful, and he cares deeply about this state. We have to have people like Joe on this committee that aren't looking for promotion in life, that have plenty of things to do in their lives, but they do this because they want to contribute toward helping hit the ball out of the park the first time, and that's what this is all about. So, hey, thanks for bringing that up. I actually need to get Joe on and talk more about that with him. Hey, listen, were you going to say something else? Sorry.
No. Yeah. I just agree. Yeah. You need to get Joe on, and I agree about everything you said.
So the SOS Pascagoula effort, we've talked about it several times on Coast Vue, but Mary Martha at the Jackson County Economic Development Foundation, you and others are really focused on this. What's the latest?
The latest is that we continue to take in stories on the sospascagoula.com website of people who are affected by this issue. And the issue, as you have discussed, as you mentioned, with Mary Martha, with Clayton Legier, with many other community leaders, is basically that people in Pascagoula who want to rebuild or renovate or improve their home in some way cannot spend more than 50% of the value of that home in doing those improvements if it is in a flood zone. And now, since Hurricane Katrina, 82% of the city is in a flood zone. So it's essentially causing blight, to be perfectly blunt.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we've gone through this before, but if you're hearing this for the first time, let me break it down real quick. After Hurricane Katrina, especially in Pascagoula, because what happened in Pascagoula, you had a lot of flooding in areas that were maybe in the flood zone, a lot of areas that were outside the flood zone. So when they redid the maps, it included most of Pascagoula. So what this meant essentially is that a lot of people rebuilt below the new flood map requirements, and that was what's called the grandfather. This is after Hurricane Katrina. If they did not have more than 50% damage, they could rebuild their home or correct, the damage that was done, and they would be grandfathered into the flood insurance program, and not have to raise their home. But there was another piece to that kind of lived with the home in perpetuity, which is to say, from now on, you can't spend more, not just in the repair after the storm, but from now on, you can never spend more than 50% of the value of the home in perpetuity. Now imagine, Haley Barber, for example, brought out a case where if a tree fell on the home and did tremendous damage, you wouldn't be able to fix it if it was more than well, you would be able to, but if you wanted the bank to continue to have the mortgage, the bank requires you to have flood insurance. And if you have more than 50% repairs, you're not going to be able to get flood insurance. And the multiplier effect of this home by home by home over time has been to take a lot of houses out of commission. And I don't think they ever intended that to happen, Paige. Unfortunately, that's either legislation is going to have to happen or some administrative change.
Right. And as you mentioned, Mary Martha Henson at the Jackson County Economic Development Foundation, who spent 10 years of her career on the Hill working for Congressman Pickering and Senator Cochran. In her research, she has discovered that there's a lot of misunderstanding by the decision makers and policymakers in Washington, D.C. about what this looks like. They think it's people, more affluent homeowners with second homes on the beach, and that is not what this is. This is salt of the earth people. They build ships for our U.S. Navy to defend our country and our freedoms. They teach our children. They protect our citizens or put out the fires and treat the wounds. It is the real meat and potatoes, if you will, of the the working people, and it's their homes. And we're trying now to tell our own story so that there is a more accurate view from the people of the people in Washington, and looking for ways to do that, as you mentioned, legislatively, and where are the vehicles where we might be able to see some relief. And not just Pascagoula, but some communities along the Jersey Shore as well. As we know, Hurricane Sandy hit them unexpectedly, similarly to Hurricane Katrina.
I would say that anywhere where there are FEMA maps, that there's some impact of this if there's been rebuilding after a storm of any sort. So, some areas of Texas, certainly some areas of Louisiana, all across Florida, up the eastern seaboard, you've got this applies. Now, I don't know, maybe there are some communities that are hit as hard as Pascagoula, but when you talk about, 82% of Pascagoula, again, every other community of coastal Mississippi has some aspect of this, but nothing like what we're dealing with in Pascagoula.
Well, that's right. And of course, our argument over here on the east end of the county is that you can just walk over the arbitrary state line into Alabama, where Grand Bay is, with the exact same elevations and not have the same limitations that FEMA drew and the Corps of Engineers drew with our maps over here. So it is a multi-layered, complex issue, but facing it head on, identifying it for what it is, bad policy, and educating the people who have the power to bring relief, because as you mentioned, it's probably unintended consequences, but dire consequences nonetheless. I mean, 90% of the city did go underwater in Hurricane Katrina, but Hurricane Katrina was possibly a 500-year storm.
Right. Let's hope that's the case. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about this and how it might actually affect you, even though you're not in Pascagoula, you can do a search on SOS Pascagoula. There's a website. You can go to YouTube and see a video. There's a great video you guys put together that's narrated by former Governor Haley Barbour. And in fact, one of the wonderful statements that's made toward the end of that video is that these are the people who build the ships to protect the world. And that, to me, that's such a powerful statement. Paige, it's been a pleasure. We'll catch up with you next week. Yeah, we'll catch up with you next couple of weeks and talk more about what's happening at the chamber these days. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ricky.
You bet. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks.
Oh, actually, we'll see you after this break.
Yeah.